Hello, everybody. I think today in this episode, I have to talk a little bit more about this issue of being free to remarry among Jehovah's Witnesses. Because if you are someone on the outside of this religion, it is such a ridiculous rule that you cannot even begin to explain it to someone because they probably can't wrap their head around it, rightfully so. Now that I look at it from a different viewpoint, I think I cannot believe that we spent years and painful hours worrying about this being free to remarry. So basically what it means is that Jehovah's Witnesses accept the only divorce reason before God is that there was fornication or adultery, sexual misconduct. You can separate under some other circumstances, but you're not free to remarry. So for example, I know one sister who was just absolutely at the end of her rope. She tried everything and she just had to leave her husband. And the elders talked to her and said, but you are not free to remarry because there was no fornication. She was so faithful and really wanted to do what was right before God. So she separated, but viewed herself as still married before God for 20 years. So 20 years wasted believing and really truly thinking that before God the marriage is still legitimate, so you have to, just be by yourself. And it's so cruel. And I know so many other cases of people that have really suffered with this. For example, I know one sister that moved from Europe and married someone in the States. And they were married only for a short period of time, and she's young and she's beautiful, and he comes home one day and he says, I don't want to be married to you anymore, I'm leaving you. No grounds. Who knows what's going on in his mind. He was actually an elder, but they did delete him as an elder. But to her they say, you're not free to remarry. So this young beautiful sister now had to move back to Europe, and she's not free to date, not free to remarry, because she's in this mental prison thinking, I am still bound to my husband, and she doesn't know what he's up to. Is he having sex with someone else? Because she's now so far away, she can't even get any proof. So she's been single for all these years, and it must really just seem like so crazy to her because she's sitting there, she's single, but she's not really single in the Jehovah's Witness world. I'm sure her husband over in the States, who knows what's up with him, he's not telling her that she's free to remarry, so he's keeping her in this prison. And I'm sure it's also because he doesn't want to get disfellowship because he's still a witness and she's a witness. So now years are going to go by. She's young and beautiful, and she's going to be bitter and hurt and still doing this to herself. And my heart really goes out to her. I think of her all the time. But it is a mental prison because in all reality, we are free. We can date. We can remarry. We're just in this mental prison thinking that we can't because we're thinking and we're so brainwashed thinking that we're doing this for God. Another brother I knew, similar situation, very young, married. He comes home, his wife cleared out the apartment. She moved away. He's sure that she had a new boyfriend. And how they treated him was so absolutely humiliating because now he wasn't really exemplary anymore because he was separated. It wasn't even his choice. He thinks he's free, but he can't prove it. His wife filed for divorce, but she never told him that he's free to remarry. So he's at a service meeting one day, and all the sisters show up and him. So he's the only brother. And he's not allowed to pray. Now, when you're in the Jehovah's Witness organization, when we always learn that men have to pray and men have to take the lead, obviously I don't even believe all this stuff anymore, but when you're in the organization, it is so humiliating when you're a brother and you were a servant and you're really just trying to do everything right. And they tell you, well, you're not exemplary, so you can't pray. And they basically kick this poor guy while he was down because he didn't do any of this. Like, he didn't even know it was coming. He didn't know she was leaving him. He didn't know, and she won't tell him that he's free. Now, I know a lot of people would say, oh, I would just go free myself. But for a lot of these people who truly believe that this is the truth and that they will die in Armageddon and that they want to do right, they don't go and do that because they believe that it's wrong. And I think a lot of people think that this isn't the real life, like this is a test and I just have to make it till paradise. So they just want to be faithful in this life and they won't free themselves. And the other thing is, what if he already was free for years before God? He just didn't know it. Wouldn't that still mean he's free though? It's just so cruel. It's just so cruel. So when I had met him, he had already been like single all these years, and we just thought he was kind of like this bachelor guy, who always was bachelor. I had no idea that in the congregation he was still considered married, which is so ridiculous because obviously in the world he's divorced and single. But no, he told me, he's like, I'm technically still married, and it's been a long time. And I think he carries that around like, I'm married, but I'm divorced. It doesn't even really make sense. And it is so depressing. And my heart goes out to all these people in limbo. So what the elders had told me, because I'm like, so how do you... It wasn't really a priority to me. I was going through a divorce. Who am I going to date anyways? I don't really have time to date. I had my kids, and I just really wanted to be a mom. It just was like a technicality to me. I just wanted to be done with everything. And it also irked me that obviously I was free to remarry because he was sexing all around town. It was clear. I knew he was. And so to me, it irked me that we all know he's having sex. He's a sex addict. Like, he's not hiding it. And you guys are still not gonna, like, consider me free? That was just so incredibly, like, mind-boggling. And I was going around and around with one of my friends, and I'm like, I just don't understand. Like, obviously I'm free. Obviously I have all this proof. It just doesn't even make sense. And I know that I am free. That's all that should matter. And she said to me, well, you could always write Bethel, but they're going to start a file on you if you write to Bethel. And I looked at her and I'm like, what? And she's like, yeah, because they really always want you to go to the brothers in your hall, but if you feel like you got to write to Bethel, do it, but they will start a file for you in Bethel. And I'm like, that is so weird. And it's one of those little nuggets that I remembered. And I should kind of know this because my grandfather over the years had written many letters to Bethel. And I mean, I guess I didn't really know that they start a file on you, but I knew that when he would get answers from Bethel, they often wouldn't make sense. And they don't actually send a reply right back to you. But I will talk about that in a different episode, an upcoming episode. And I will talk about the letters that my grandpa had sent that didn't even make any sense. The answers were so weird. I'll keep that for another episode. But anyways, this whole being free thing. So I did talk to the brothers. I would just say things to them sometimes, and I'm like, I just don't understand. Like, I feel like I almost should sign a piece of paper like, hi, yeah, I know I'm free before Jehovah. I feel like I have enough evidence I'm free. And they're like, well, yeah, I know, but Bethel said no. And that was kind of weird to me too. Like, how come Bethel says no? Like, isn't it like to not go beyond the things that are written? Where's this written, And I know of people in the past who had to become free, and they would like hire a detective and all this stuff. And I said, so I guess, here I'm going through a divorce. I don't even have any money. So I guess I have to like hire a detective so I would be declared free in the congregation in front of Jehovah. And they said, well, we did ask Bethel about that too, and they no longer accept the evidence from a private detective, an investigator either, because those pictures could also be faked. And I said, so how are people gonna be free? Like, Troy doesn't want to get disfellowshipped, which I understand. I am not like caring about him being disfellowshipped or not. I just want to be free. And they said, well, this is so ridiculous. And that's when they made the suggestion that I could ask him if he had sexual immorality in front of my son, who could be the witness, which is insane. And I said, so basically either he confesses and I happen to have a witness there, or I stand in the room while he's having sex with someone and have a witness with me. So there's no other way that I can be free except those two things, basically. And my heart goes out to all the people in this insane limbo. It's just insanity that they make people go through this. What a burden. And another story comes to my mind about this whole like being free thing, because we had a sister in our old congregation who moved in, and she was pregnant. She said that she was divorced and free to remarry, and she provided her divorce decree and a letter from the elders in her previous congregation that her husband cheated on her. And so then she started dating a brother in our hall who was really sweet. And he was like so in love with this girl. And it turns out these stories, it's just unbelievable the things that witnesses come up with when they're supposed to be like these honest people. But I do also think sometimes these circumstances and situations make people crazy, because it's just not normal. Why do you have to prove that you're free? Why do you have to prove that you're divorced? Well, this girl, before she gets remarried to this really sweet brother, she confides in him and she tells him that she was never even married or divorced. She just didn't want to get in trouble or disfellowshipped. So she got pregnant, and since she'd been away, and then moved to our hall, nobody really knew any better. So she printed out fake divorce papers and a fake letter from the elders saying that she was free to remarry. And I just can't even, the length you have to go through in order not to get disfellowshipped. And it was just a mess. Of course, she was really not a good, genuine person though either, because she ended up marrying this sweet brother. And I do think she kind of just married him to get away and have someone who takes care of her financially, because she did not treat him well at all. And as soon as she married him, she just started maxing out every single one of his credit cards immediately. And she started cheating on him immediately. Again, he didn't have proof either that he was free. And he goes to the brothers and he's like, I can't even stay married to her, because I have to file for divorce, or I have to be able to shut all these credit cards down. And I can't, because if you're married, you're responsible for them. And the brothers were so upset. And he's like, well, she's already cheating on me. Not two witnesses, but he knew she was. And she had moved out. She kind of separated from him. They did not care about that. All they cared about was that he went to file for divorce. And the only reason he had to file for divorce is to put an end to all this insane spending. That was actually probably one of the quickest J-Dub marriages and divorces I've ever seen. That was like Kim Kardashian style, like a few months. And the real victim was the brother, because he really probably believed like only marry in the Lord, every Christian's a good person, and this girl was just really truly like conniving. But you see all these things happening and you're like, the madness, like this man, he was so hurt. He really was hurt. Plus then he's the bad guy for filing for divorce. And it's not like he really wanted to break up his marriage. It was already broken. She was already off with another guy, and they still didn't want him to file for divorce. And isn't it just like nobody's business? It is nobody's business. And then I saw a really interesting little quote on Reddit too, because I had told a little bit of my story previously about how I had filed for divorce, but we weren't able to sell the house quickly, so I still had to live in the house with the kids. We couldn't go anywhere, and I had asked Troy, could you move out? And he refused, because legally it is his house too. So I talked to the brothers, and I said, I just can't leave yet. Like, I can't move out because I don't know where to go. I have kids. Like, what do you do? And they were pretty okay with that. They were not like mean, but it was like a problem, because then our divorce finalized and we still had to live together for a short while till the house sale went through. And they are kind of worried, oh no, now you're like legally not married, so you're together. And somebody wrote this on Reddit, and this was a really interesting point in reply to my story. You talk about living with your ex after divorce and the elders having a problem with it. Just to show you how ridiculous and stupid this teaching is. If the organization sees you as still married, then what is the problem? The problem is that they want to have it both ways. When they want to apply the scriptural view and say you're not free to remarry, they will do that. But when it comes to living with your ex post-divorce, they have an issue with that too. They can't have it both ways. Isn't that so true? I mean, point taken. And it just shows you how culty all this stuff is too, and how controlling. Leave people alone. They're going through so much already anyways when they're having to separate and divorce. This is just such an added layer of burden on the people, especially the ones that didn't even really want to go through all this, that wanted to make it work. Like the sweet sister from Europe where the husband just left her. I mean, I'm sure she's just crushed and so low already anyways because her husband left her, and now she's just going to be in this limbo forever. It's so stupid. I would really like to hear your stories of being free to remarry. Please share them in the comments. Isn't this just like how the Pharisees were, though? Micromanaging, worrying about all these little details and total nonsense just to make people batty. I mean, it makes you batty how absurd all of this is. And the lady that I mentioned earlier that had to separate from her husband, and then because she still believed, remained single for like 20 years because she thought she wasn't free to remarry. She's a total like baddie because she rocks. The elders, when they met with her, they read to her in 1 Corinthians 7:10, "To the married people I give instructions, not I but the Lord, that a wife should not separate from her husband." And this lady she knows the Bible. Actually, it's kind of funny. She knew it better than the elders did because she was a very, very intense Bible student. And I think this is where it clashes a lot of times. Some Jehovah's Witnesses are hardcore organizational rule followers, and some use their brain and followed what the Bible said, and therefore could kind of discern, like, this is going beyond what is written. But this particular sister, she said to the elders in that elders meeting, which they did not like, well, we have to read the next verse too. And the elders were like, no, this is where we stop. And she's like, no, we have to read verse 11 because it goes on and it says, but if she does separate, let her remain unmarried or else be reconciled with her husband. And so, like, this is such an example of cherry picking for the elders. They wanted to read the sentence that a wife should not separate from her husband, period, and it ends there. We're not going to read further. And the sister's like, no, it says, but if she does separate, let her remain unmarried. But even so, all of that, I mean, she knew better than them, and they were going to try to guilt her into not even separating when she was at her wits' ends already. And here's also a thing. Some people, honestly, maybe there isn't even anything wrong with both of them. They just don't go together. They just don't have chemistry. I don't think God would care that you leave a marriage where there's no love and where you can stand each other and possibly bring children into the world where there's just disharmony in the house. Life is too short. But I'm going to leave it at that. All this cherry picking and nitpicking is so sick. Please be free. Throw this burden from you to be in this mental prison to let men make all these little rules, what you can and what you can't do, what's right and what's wrong. Just be a good person. Try to do what's right. Try not to hurt somebody. That's really the bottom line. And when you're free, you're free. And really think about all the sisters or brothers who had a worldly spouse and got divorced, and now they have to prove to the elders that the worldly spouse has had sex with someone. I mean, to the worldly person, it must seem so crazy if you're asking him to admit that you've been unfaithful and you have a witness there. And I'm sure they must think we're loony, because it is loony. Imagine, like, your ex runs out of you and he's not a Jehovah's Witness and you have to, like, confront him with a witness in tow. Could you please just tell me that I'm free to remarry in front of, like, this person who's now a witness? I mean, it's so absurd and crazy. And then the elders probably think it's your fault anyway, since you married a worldly person, so you deserve this, like, absolute awkwardness and humiliation. It's just sad, very sad. I actually have one more crazy being free / divorce within the Jehovah's Witness little teeny tiny fact / story. And it's in the Philippines, which is a very Catholic country. You cannot obtain a divorce. The only way to be free from your spouse is basically death. I couldn't find a lot on the subject. I saw one comment on Reddit where he explained this, but if you know more, please comment underneath and enlighten me or correct me. But basically, as a Jehovah's Witness, if you get a divorce, it's not recognized. Or if you're from a different country and you want to marry a Filipino sister who is scripturally free but can't obtain a divorce, like she's separated. So how they handle this is like a loophole that doesn't even really make any sense because they're not divorced in front of the government. They can get married or remarried in the Kingdom Hall, even though she's not officially divorced, but she's free before God. They have to sign a piece of paper basically stating that they're promising like to be together, and it's like a promise certificate. And I don't know if that is until they can get to a different country where they can legally marry or something.
But it is all these man-made rules, because where does it say this in the Bible? It's just so it doesn't count in other countries when you're not divorced legally, but it does count in this country, and every country has its different rules, which really reminds me of the Malawi-Mexico conflict, where different rules for similar situations that don't make any sense at all, and that just basically human beings who pretend like all these things come from God just make up stuff. It's really what it is. And really what it does is just put such a burden on people. It really does. I can't even believe that they actually said that they could get remarried in the Philippines and not just put these people in complete and utter limbo forever and say, well, you're just going to have to wait till paradise because, it's so close anyways. But who knows? They might change that again tomorrow too, since they're on the rampage of just changing everything. Another story that my mom experienced when she was a teenager was that there was a couple in her Kingdom Hall that had just gotten married, and they went on their honeymoon. And on the honeymoon, there was a car accident, really, really bad. And the wife, the newlywed wife, actually was completely paralyzed, but not dead after this accident. And so the brother was very, very young. You know how witnesses get married extremely young sometimes. I think he was probably like 18, 19, if I remember it right. And the wife also was very young. And her parents did not blame him and were completely compassionate. And they took the wife back into their house and basically for the rest of her life took care of her because she was completely handicapped. And the elders let him be free to remarry and granted him a divorce. And he got remarried and lived like a whole life with his new wife. But if you think of it as like how they rule people, this is out of the norm. So for some people, you keep them in limbo, and I'm sure it just had to do with like that elder body that they felt bad for this guy, and they were like, oh yeah, you're free to remarry. And they granted him freedom. But if you look at it from a Jehovah's Witness standpoint, he was not free to remarry. They had consummated their marriage. They were married before God, and she was alive. And I don't know, it's kind of, he was her husband, and I understand that he was young, but it's just a really difficult situation. I'm not in that situation, so I can't say anything about it, but it's just so man-made. Everybody decides how they want to decide. If you happen to have good elders, they extend you some kindness. If you have cruel elders, they can make your life miserable. And this situation just shows that too. And my mom said she remembers just being really baffled because there's always this whole ordeal with being free and not being free and having to prove that you're free. And with this guy who was technically not free to remarry, they just say, oh, you're fine, go ahead. And it's just whichever the wind blows. So I'm sure there's 100,000 more stories of poor people's lives being miserable. But this is all for today, and I'll see you guys tomorrow continuing the Troy story.